Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You walk past 12 perfect houses, fresh paint, working electricity. Empty Victor's village in District 12 is a ghost suburb, a luxury cul-de-sac in a town where people freeze to death on their kitchen floors. At face value, it looks generous. The capital built mansions for winners, right? But here's the real question. Why would a government that lets children starve invest in pristine homes almost no one will ever use? Look at the numbers. In 74 years of games, District 12 produces 3 living victors. Haymitch, Katniss, Peter, that's it. Yet the village has 12 houses in the books, fully powered, fully stocked, sitting on a hill above a district of around 8,000 people with almost no medicine. That part matters because it tells you the capital is willing to pour resources into a symbol while refusing to fix the mines, the hospital, or the food supply. So maybe the real mystery isn't, why is District 12 so poor? The better question is, why does the capital keep it poor, weak, and isolated when it still needs its coal? Coal runs the trains, the power plants, the capital's glittering night sky. You'd think they'd want those workers healthy. Instead, they build a tiny, rich neighborhood and surround it with hunger. That contradiction is the point. District 12 wasn't just neglected, it was engineered to fail. As a district, and as a competitor in the games, you can see it in everything from the way the seam is cut off from the merchants to the way peacekeepers are first lazy and corrupt, then suddenly replaced with Thread's brutality the moment Katniss becomes a problem. There is a lot to uncover here about how you design a population to never stand up, because the capital does invest, just not in survival. They send enough grain to keep people barely alive, enough peacekeepers to shut down open rebellion, but not enough oversight to stop the Hobbs black market from existing. On purpose. That controlled corruption creates a relationship of quiet dependence. You break the rules to eat, so you can never complain about the rules. This is where we talk about engineered weakness, not accidental poverty. And then there's the darkest proof of all. When Snow is done with District 12, he bombs it. No evacuation, no attempt to save the labor force that supposedly keeps Panem running. Only Victor's village is left standing, a ring of untouched houses in a crater of ash. So why protect the mansions and not the miners? We're going to cover how that decision, plus the reaping system, the hob, and even the peacekeepers' behavior, all point to one uncomfortable answer. In Panem, some districts aren't just oppressed, they're practice targets, and District 12 was never supposed to win. Why District 12's misery actually matters. District 12 wasn't just miserable for atmosphere, it's miserable on purpose. If you zoom out from Katniss for a second, District 12 is the capital's long-term science experiment. How little food can you give people before they stop working the mines? How much humiliation can you stack on top of the games before someone snaps? How many reapings can a population of 8,000 survive before there's no one left to send? Back in the earliest games, the brutality is raw and obvious. Public executions, mass starvation, open punishment. But by the time we're in Katniss's story, Panem has polished that cruelty. The trains are sleeker, the broadcasts are glossier, even the victors have branded talents. So why does District 12 still look frozen in a permanent Great Depression, while other districts at least function? Why does that one ring of nice houses sit on a hill, staring down at shacks and empty bellies? At face value, Victor's village looks like a reward that just landed in the wrong place. This district almost never wins, so why bother building a whole suburb for 3 victors? Why keep 12 so small when the capital needs coal? Why allow a black market at the Hob to operate in plain sight? Why tolerate drunk, lazy peacekeepers who trade for wild turkey until they suddenly get replaced by thread and firing squads? Here's the real question. What if every one of those contradictions is the point? District 12 is a test case for controlled collapse. You push the seam into starvation, but not quite enough that they stop dragging themselves into the mines. You let the Hob exist so people don't die fast enough to draw attention, but you can burn it down the second trade starts turning into organization. You keep the peacekeepers corrupt, so everyone learns the relationship between survival and obedience. Then you flip the switch to full fascist mode the moment a girl with berries embarrasses you on national television. And victory? Victory is not an escape hatch. For Haymitch, and later Katniss and Peter, winning the games is just phase 2 of the same experiment. They're relocated to Victor's village, exempt from labor, sure, but now they're on camera, on call, and on a direct line to Snow. Their trauma becomes capital content. Their homes become surveillance hubs. The promise of safety is dangled in front of the district, while the victors themselves are trapped in a new, quieter arena. That part matters because it turns District 12 into more than a sad backdrop. It becomes proof of concept for the capital's psychological warfare. Victor's village isn't random world building. It's a visible threat and a visible promise, sitting intact even after the rest of 12 is bombed into ash. If this is what the capital does to its least important district, what does that say about the system as a whole? This is where we talk about how hope, visibility, and those empty houses become weapons. Our angle. District 12 as a rigged experiment. Hope isn't neutral in Panem. It's engineered. So when you see District 12's empty victor's village on that hill, you're not just looking at poverty. You're looking at a rigged experiment. At face value, 12 is just the unlucky district. Smallest population, worst industry. Almost no victors. But here's the real question. Why would a regime that needs coal so badly invest so little in the people who pull it out of the ground? District 12 is not just unfortunate, it's deliberately underpowered. The capital keeps it tiny, around 8,000 people in the books, isolated at the far edge of Panem and starved of infrastructure. That part matters because it turns 12 into a buffer and a warning. If anything goes wrong here, a mining accident, a food riot, even a rebellion, the damage is contained, the coal can be sourced elsewhere, and the capital gets a televised example of what happens when you step out of line. This is where we talk about design, the seam versus the merchants, the lazy peacekeepers who take bribes at the hob until thread shows up, the black market that everyone pretends not to see. None of that is random. It's controlled corruption, enough illegal hunting and trading that people can barely survive, but never enough that they stop needing the capital's grain shipments. You get a district that functions just well enough to mine, but never well enough to organize. Now drop Victor's village into that setup. On paper, it's the reward. 12 houses, full power, hot water, more space than anyone in the seam can imagine. You're told from childhood that if you win the games, you get one of those. No more reaping, no more coal dust. That's the promise. But in District 12, almost no one ever wins. In 74 years, they produce exactly 2 living victors before Katniss Haymitch and an unnamed one in the films, 3 in the books. So the village stands mostly empty, a neighborhood for ghosts. The relationship between that emptiness and the rest of 12 is the point. Kids can see the mansions every day on the hill, but they can't access them. Parents can repeat the propaganda about the games being a path out of poverty, while quietly knowing the odds are so bad, it's basically a myth. Victor's village becomes a monument to false hope, visible, undeniable, and statistically unreachable. We're going to cover District 12 as a political experiment. What does a regime do when it needs a resource, but not the people? The answer is 12. You keep them hungry so they don't rebel, divided so they don't unite, and you dangle one golden ticket house that almost no one will ever occupy. Then, when Katniss breaks the system and the Quarterquell threatens that illusion, the capital simply bombs the district and leaves Victor's village intact. There is a lot to uncover here, from those enforcement choices to Snow's long-term strategy for preventing another District 13. Next, we'll zoom in on how daily life in 12 trains you to accept that rigged deal long before the reaping ever starts. What we're unpacking about District 12. So if daily life in 12 is already training you to accept a bad deal, what exactly are we unpacking in this episode? Because at face value, District 12 is just a poor coal district at the edge of Panem. But here's the real question. Why would a capital that depends on coal keep its main supplier so tiny, so neglected, and so disposable? First, we're going to cover the historical backstory of 12 after the Dark Days. Back then, this wasn't just a random mining town that got unlucky. We'll talk about how 12's position on the map, its small population of roughly 8,000, and its coal industry turned it into the perfect buffer and resource pit. The capital needs what's under the ground, not who's standing on top of it. That part matters because it explains why investment in 12 stops at the fence line and never actually reaches the people. From there, we zoom into the mechanics of control. This is where we talk about peacekeepers, but not the efficient, terrifying force you'd expect. In early 12, they're lazy, corrupt, and oddly hands-off, right up until Thread arrives. Why would a regime obsessed with order tolerate that? We'll look at the hob, the black market, and how controlled corruption keeps everyone just fed enough to work and just scared enough not to rebel. Starvation, tesserae, and the reaping all fit into this same system. Why does the reaping feel different in 12 than in a career district? And why does volunteering never become normal here? Then we'll pull the camera back and compare book versus movie District 12. On screen, 12 is grim, but it's streamlined. Quick shots of the seam, a brief look at Victor's village, then straight to the train. In the books, you sit longer with the rot, the empty houses, the exhausted miners, the sense that this place is already half dead before the games even start. We'll ask how those adaptation choices either sharpen or soften the idea that 12 was designed to fail, and why the near-untouched Victor's village feels even more surreal once the district is bombed. After that, we'll get speculative. If 12 is a template, how would the capital copy-paste this design into other weak districts? We'll imagine what a deliberately fragile fishing district or textile district would look like if you applied the same rules. Isolation, internal class divisions, controlled black markets, and a single, shiny symbol of hope on a hill. Finally, we'll tie it all together in a closing synthesis: the illusion of freedom and hope. Why did the system need one district that could fail on schedule? And what does that say about the relationship between the games, the reaping, and the promise of becoming a victor? Stick around, because the next section starts right at the beginning: how District 12 was rebuilt after the dark days to never truly stand again. Welcome to the village. Why we obsess over Panem's design. So when you zoom out from District 12's fences and that lonely row of Victor houses, you start to notice something. None of this is random, and that's really what we do here. This channel is basically Panem's unofficial planning department. We're going to cover how the districts are laid out, why the games are staged the way they are, what the capital is really doing with things like Victor's village, and how all of that messes with people's heads. If you've ever paused a scene just to ask, wait, why is that building there? You're in the right place. Because at face value, you can watch the Hunger Games as a survival story. Katniss, Peter, arena, victory. Done. But here's the real question. Why does the capital invest so much effort in the parts that aren't the arena, the reaping stage, the train, the justice building, the village on the hill? Those are all architecture of control, just as important as mutts and force fields. This is where we talk about systems instead of just scenes. The Hob isn't just a cool black market. It's a pressure valve that the capital quietly tolerates so the seam doesn't explode. Thread doesn't just show up one day. His arrival is a deliberate escalation in enforcement, timed to Katniss's growing status as a symbol. That part matters because it shows you the relationship between policy and punishment in a district designed to fail, but not too fast. If you're new here and you love pulling apart tiny details, why the mayor's house faces the square, why Victor's village in 12 survives the bombing when almost nothing else does, why a single phone line from the capital can ruin a Victor's life, you're exactly who this channel is for. We go past the plot recap and ask why these systems exist, who they benefit, and what they cost everyone else. We're going to cover how Victor's village, the reaping, tesserae, and district economies all interlock into one long game of psychological warfare. Why does becoming a victor come packaged with surveillance? Why does hope always arrive with a catch? Why does one starving coal district end up carrying so much of the capital's propaganda weight? If you want to keep walking through Panem's design with us, piece by piece, district by district, you're welcome in our own little Victor's village here. No pressure, no big speech. Just an open invitation to stick around and keep asking questions with us. Because next, we're not staying in the ruins. We're going back in time to the capital's planning tables right after the dark days, when District 12 was redesigned on paper to be poor, isolated, and expendable. And once you see how its fate was written into the blueprints, the bombing of 12 stops being a shock and starts looking inevitable. After the dark days, how District 12 got its role. So we rewind to the moment right after the dark days, when the capital isn't just putting out fires, it's redesigning the entire map of Panem. On paper, this looks orderly. 12 districts, 12 industries, all neatly labeled so nothing overlaps. Grain here, lumber there, luxury goods somewhere else. At face value, it's efficient nation building after a civil war. But here's the real question. Why lock each district into one narrow role with no redundancy and no real overlap? Because if District 4 grows food and District 7 makes weapons, they have reasons to talk, trade, and eventually ask what happens if they stop sending anything to the capital. So this is where we talk about containment. By freezing every district into a single industry, the new Treaty of Treason doesn't just end the rebellion. It ends cross-district solidarity. You don't have a nation anymore. You have 12 isolated supply chains, all pointed in one direction, upward, toward the capital. District 12's slot in this system is coal, not glamorous, not optional. Coal is the backbone of the capital's power grid, the trains, the factories that keep the games broadcast going. There is a lot to uncover here because coal gives 12 a weird relationship to power. It produces the literal fuel for Panem, but the people who dig it out never get to see the lights it turns on. Geography does some of the work. Sticking coal country in the far Appalachian edge of Panem means it's remote, hard to reach, easy to ignore. But that part matters because the capital leans into that remoteness. No real investment, almost no infrastructure, a single rickety fence that's off more than it's on. If coal is essential, why not protect it better? Why not build it up? The answer is simple. They don't want a strong, proud mining district. They want a barely functional one. And then there's the population. In the books, District 12 has around 8,000 people. That's tiny. That means fewer peacekeepers required, fewer potential rebels, and fewer mouths to feed if the capital wants to reward them after a victor wins the games. It's a district you can starve, punish, or erase without destabilizing the overall system. You can feel the cold math in that. Here's the real question again. If 12 is so small and so poor, why not automate the coal or shift production somewhere closer to the capital? Because 12 isn't just a mine, it's a message. District 12 becomes the cautionary tale the other districts watch from afar. It proves the capital's promise in reverse. Obey, and you might be District 1. Disobey, and you risk becoming 12, or worse. It's a living billboard that says, this is the bottom. Don't test us. And once you understand that, the bombing of 12 later isn't a sudden overreaction. It's the logical next step of a plan that always treated the district as expendable. The real twist is what the capital chooses to leave standing. We're going to cover that next. Snow's playbook. Learning from the first rebellion, we're going to cover why that expendable label on District 12 isn't just cruelty. It's strategy. And to see it, you have to go back to Coriolanus Snow before he was president, when the games were barely more than a bloodbath in a basement. Back then, in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes era, The games are clumsy, no pageantry, no victor's village, no real promise of glory, just cages, rubble, and kids dying in the dark. The districts hate it, the capital barely cares, and the whole system is one bad riot away from collapsing. Because here's the real question. What did Snow actually learn from the first rebellion? It wasn't use more force. Panem already tried that. It was that brute force alone fails if people still feel united in their misery. You need structures that make them police themselves, compete with each other, and fear losing the tiny scraps they've been given. This is where we talk about his career. As a young mentor and later a political climber, Snow watches the games evolve from punishment into spectacle, then into a full control system. Sponsors, interviews, victors as celebrities, each layer is another leash. That part matters because it shows you how he thinks about districts too, not just as resource hubs, but as long-term experiments in obedience. So where does District 12 fit in that playbook? On paper, it's a coal mine. At face value, you'd think the capital would modernize it, protect its workers, make sure the fuel keeps flowing. Instead, 12 stays tiny, around 8,000 people, with almost no infrastructure, medical care, or real investment. Why? Because in Snow's mind, 12 is the perfect non-threat district. It's remote, tucked on the edge of Panem. It's culturally fragmented, with the seam and the merchants barely speaking, barely intermarrying, barely trusting each other. It has almost no victors, no tradition of power, no strong relationship to the capital beyond shipments of coal. If 12 ever rebels, the damage is containable. And that's exactly the point. By keeping 12 underdeveloped, Snow turns it into a low-risk testing ground. How hungry can you keep a population before they snap? How corrupt can the peacekeepers be, running black markets, taking bribes, before order collapses? How much humiliation can people swallow at the reaping before someone stops putting their name in for tesserae? District 12 becomes a living lab for controlled collapse. When things drift too far toward chaos, the capital swaps in thread, tightens the noose, and watches the reaction. When a victor appears, Snow adds a new variable, Victor's Village. A handful of mansions on a hill, dropped into the poorest district, is not generosity, it's a calibration tool. You can see him testing. Will visible luxury from a hometown victor inspire hope or jealousy or apathy? Will the seam and the merchants unite around their victors or resent them? And when he finally bombs 12 and leaves only Victor's Village standing, that's the ultimate data point and the setup for what we'll unpack next. Snow's experiment doesn't stop at Victor's Village. It runs straight through the coal seams under District 12. You're sitting on the fuel that keeps the capital's lights on. So why are you starving to death on top of it? At face value, that makes no sense. If coal is essential to the capital's infrastructure, you'd expect 12 to be treated as a prized asset. Better housing, real medical care, food security, maybe even some basic safety regulations so your workforce doesn't literally explode underground. Instead, Katniss grows up watching miners die, watching her own family nearly starve after her father's death, in a district where a broken leg can be a death sentence, because there's essentially one drunk doctor and some morphling. So here's the real question. Why invest so heavily in the resource, but almost nothing in the people who extract it? Any halfway competent economist in the capital could tell you a healthier, better fed population would be more productive. Fewer cave-ins, fewer sick days, more coal. So why accept this level of inefficiency? This is where we talk about design. District 12 isn't a mismanaged mine. It's a controlled failure. The point isn't to maximize coal output, it's to maximize control. There is a lot to uncover here, but the basic relationship is simple. The capital will sacrifice efficiency if inefficiency keeps a district weak, divided, and too exhausted to rebel. Think about wages. Keeping 12 on the edge of famine means workers can't bargain. They can't strike. They can barely think beyond the next meal. Low pay keeps population growth down too. If most children don't survive illness or accidents, the district never gets big enough to become a serious threat. That part matters because a larger, healthier 12 would remember the first rebellion very differently and might be able to finish what the rebels started. You see it in the details. Mine safety is almost non-existent. Katniss's father dies in an explosion that everyone treats as routine. Schools are basically holding pens, with no real training beyond what you need to follow orders and fill out forms. There's no path to becoming an engineer, no promise you could ever rise out of the seam on merit. Even the one rational adaptation to food shortages, hunting in the woods, is criminalized. Crossing the fence to keep your family alive turns you into a lawbreaker the moment you succeed. And yet, the capital tolerates a black market at the hob, lazy peacekeepers, smuggling. Why? Because that controlled corruption keeps 12 barely functional while reminding everyone that survival itself depends on staying small, quiet, and grateful. So if the capital is willing to run such a critical resource operation this badly, what does that tell you about how expendable District 12 really is? If the coal keeps flowing for now, how long before the people are considered more useful as an example than as a workforce? That's where we're going to cover the next stage of the plan. What happens when a failed district has finally served its purpose? The birth of Victor's village, hope on a leash. So when a failed district has finally served its purpose, what do you do with it? You don't fix it. You hang a prize in the middle of the wreckage. This is where we talk about Victor's village. On paper, it's a reward. Win the Hunger Games, never work again. Move your family into a mansion. At face value, it's the capital saying, see? We're not just cruel, we can be generous. But here's the real question. Why start building these little suburbs of luxury after the early, bloodiest years of the games? Back then, the spectacle alone was enough. The first generations remembered open war. They didn't need a sales pitch. They just needed to be scared. But fear has a half-life. Kids grow up who only know the games as a TV event. So why should they keep accepting the reaping? Why not revolt, or at least refuse to play along? Snow understands that you can't terrorize people forever without offering some kind of promise. So he invents a new relationship between the districts and the arena. The games stop being only a punishment and become a lottery ticket. One name pulled means death, but one name pulled could mean a house with hot water, full electricity, and a stocked pantry when the rest of your street is starving. That part matters because it turns the horror into a gamble. Not, how do we end this? But, what if my kid is the one who wins? Conceptually, Victor's village is brilliant and disgusting at the same time. It's not in the capital, but it's not really in the district either. It's a separate enclave, usually elevated or fenced off, with better roads, better roofs, better everything. You can see it on your way to the mines or the fields, but you can't touch it. It tells you the games can make you almost capital adjacent without ever letting you escape Panem's class system. And Snow knows the psychological power of proximity. It's one thing to hear that someone somewhere is rich. It's another to watch a person who used to stand in your breadline walk past you in clean clothes, headed back up the hill. The question stops being, why are we starving? And becomes, why didn't we get picked? Or, why didn't our tribute try harder? There is a lot to uncover here about how that resentment gets redirected away from the capital and toward your own neighbors. But District 12 twists the design. With only a handful of victors ever, its village stands mostly empty. Instead of a bustling trophy case, you get a ghost suburb, Hammich's decayed house, Katniss's too quiet street, rows of dark windows. The same architecture that screams aspiration in District 1 turns accusatory in 12. Every unused house is a reminder of all the tributes who died without earning it. So why would Snow keep investing in a luxury neighborhood almost no one lives in? And what happens when the only part of District 12 that survives the fire is this hollow promise on the hill? How Victor's village is supposed to work when it works. On paper, Victor's village is the answer to that question. You burn a district down every year emotionally, so you have to offer them something to rebuild with. That something is a mansion, a pantry that never runs out, and a front row seat to the one person who beat the system. At face value, it's a reward. You win the games, you get a house, your family never worries about food again. But here's the real question. Why does the capital care enough to build a luxury neighborhood in every single district, even the ones they barely invest in otherwise? The reason is that Victor's village turns the games from pure punishment into a twisted lottery. Suddenly, the arena isn't just where you die, it's where, in theory, you might win a lifetime of comfort, status, and relative safety. That part matters because it changes how every reaping feels. You're not just watching two kids march to their deaths. You're watching the one tiny doorway to upward mobility your district is ever going to see. So tributes stop being only victims. They become potential celebrities, potential providers. We're going to cover how this plays out in the career districts, but you can already see the shift. Families talk about if they win, almost as much as if they die. The relationship between district and tribute turns into this warped investment. You cry when they leave, but you also imagine that victory tour when they come back rich. In districts 1, 2, and 4, the capital dials this up to 11. You have training centers, mentors grooming kids from childhood, and an entire culture built around volunteering. Why would anyone fight for a spot in a death match? Because Victor's village, plus prestige, plus that promise of never being reaped again, reframes volunteering as ambition instead of desperation. This is where we talk about the entertainment loop. Victors don't just disappear into their houses, they come back every year on your television, then physically return from their fancy street to mentor the next pair. They're recurring characters in the capital's longest-running show. The visual is important. Someone has to win. Someone did win, and they live right over there. There is a lot to uncover here in terms of pacing and ritual. The parade, the interviews, the post-games coverage, then the victor walking back into their spotless home, while the rest of the district trudges back to the mines or the factories. The contrast keeps the hope alive just enough to keep people participating. But here's the pattern interrupt. This whole system assumes a certain number of victors, a certain level of investment, a certain density of wealth to show off. In District 12, those numbers never materialize. The architecture is the same idea, but the culture and design of the district twist Victor's village into something else entirely. A haunted street, a failed promise, and eventually the only part of 12 the capital decides is worth preserving. So how does the model break when there are almost no winners to sell the fantasy, tempting a better class of tribute? So how does the model break when there are almost no winners to sell the fantasy? To answer that, we have to zoom out from District 12's empty cul-de-sac and look at what Snow actually wanted the games to become. You think back to the early games when they were basically ritualized slaughter, starving kids dragged on stage, no training centers, no career packs, just terror. At face value, that already scares the districts into obedience. So why change a formula that works? Why pour money into mansions, parades, and pageantry? Why build Victor's village at all? Because Snow isn't aiming for fear alone. He's aiming for participation. The capital doesn't just want tributes who are afraid of dying. It wants tributes who are half convinced they could win. That part matters because a terrified child makes for a tragic broadcast, but a semi-willing tribute makes for a story. A character, someone the audience can bet on, ship, sponsor, and then mourn on cue. This is where we talk about Victor's village as bait, not reward. You're not just promised survival, you're promised generational uplift. Your entire family moves into those houses. Your children grow up with full bellies, hot water, and electricity that doesn't flicker. The district gets to stare at a permanent before and after, the grey streets they're stuck in, and the gleaming proof of what one victor can supposedly earn. And here's the real question: where does that promise actually land? It works best in the mid-tier districts, the careers' home turf. In 1, 2, 4, people already have some stability. They're not wondering if they'll eat at all. They're wondering if they can move up. So the relationship to the games shifts. The reaping isn't just a death sentence. It's a twisted scholarship program. Parents can convince themselves that training their kids is rational, that volunteering is a strategy, not a sacrifice. There is a lot to uncover here about class. In those districts, Victor's village is visible, populated, aspirational. You know a Victor's cousin. You see their kids wearing better clothes at school. The capital's promise feels concrete enough that you can almost touch it, and that's exactly the point. But drop that same model into 12, and everything warps. The baseline is so low that the bait stops reading as real. Most people have never spoken to a victor. By the time Katniss is reaped, there are only 2 living ones, and one of them is so drunk he barely functions. The village isn't a golden ticket. It's a ghost town on a hill that proves the games almost never pay out here. So, if Victor's village is the bait, why does the capital leave the hook so visible in District 12 that almost no one bites? Why maintain a failed promise in full view? And what does that tell us about what District 12 was actually for in Snow's long-term design? Volunteering. Feature, not bug. Volunteering looks, on the surface, like mercy. Someone steps in, someone gets saved, the crowd gasps. At face value, It almost feels like a crack in the capital's armor. But here's the real question. If the games are supposed to be brutal and fair, why would Snow allow a mechanic that lets you dodge a random death sentence? Why not force every district to live with whatever two names come out of that bowl? The reason is simple and nasty. Volunteering doesn't weaken the games. It supercharges them. This is where we talk about spectacle and the illusion of choice. When a career tribute in District 1 or 2 steps forward, it isn't breaking the rules. It's the rules working perfectly. You're not just watching children get drafted, you're watching them audition. Train for years. Step out on cue with perfect posture and a rehearsed smirk. The capital can point and say, they wanted this. The cruelty gets reframed as ambition, and Victor's village is the end point of that performance. The promise at the end of the blood trail. Not just survival, but a house, hot water, full power, a pantry that never empties. You get to live almost as well as a capital citizen without ever leaving your district. That part matters because it keeps the relationship between district and capital aspirational instead of purely fearful. You're not only terrified of the games, you're told to hope you win them. So why does that system barely function in District 12? Because the math is broken on purpose. In the career districts, volunteering is a gamble with real odds, multiple victors, a culture built around training, and visible proof that the village can be reached. In 12, you have 3 living victors in 74 years. One is a drunk who sleeps in his own vomit. One is an old woman in a house no one ever enters. One doesn't exist yet. You can see the mansions on the hill. You just can't see a believable path to get there. The risk-reward ratio is so skewed that volunteering basically dies as a concept. No one from the scene looks at Hamish's decayed porch and thinks, that's my ticket out. The capital leaves the bait visible but rusted because District 12 isn't meant to generate hopeful career tributes. It's meant to sit at the edge of the map as proof that some districts are simply losers. Which is why Katniss's volunteer moment hits the system like a glitch. She doesn't step forward for a mansion or immunity from future reapings. She doesn't even believe she can win. She volunteers for one reason, Prim. It's an act of love, not aspiration, and that misalignment is exactly what the capital didn't plan for. Their whole design assumes that if anyone volunteers, it's for status, for the village, for proximity to the capital's world. So what happens when a district built to fail accidentally produces a volunteer who isn't chasing the promise at all, but is willing to burn the whole promise down? That's where District 12 stops being a dead-end coal mine and starts becoming something much more dangerous. District 12, the control group that refused to play. District 12 is where the capital's whole experiment starts to glitch. Every other district eventually learns the rule. The games are horrible, but if you play them right, you might get a victor, a party, and a shiny row of houses on a hill. District 12 looks at that same setup and collectively goes, no, that's not real. And here's the real question. What happens to a system of control when one district refuses to treat the arena as a sport at all? At face value, 12 is just the poorest district. 8,000 people, coal dust, starvation, and a reaping square where the odds don't feel bad, they feel pointless. You don't see kids training with swords in the meadow. You see them trading tesserae for grain and hoping not to cough up blood before winter ends. When your daily question is, Do we eat? The capital's promise of fame and a victor's village mansion doesn't land as hope. It lands as a bad joke. This is where we talk about the control group idea. If the career districts are the capital's success stories, proof that volunteering can be glamorous, District 12 is the baseline. What happens if you change nothing? No investment, no real infrastructure, barely functioning peacekeepers who are more interested in contraband white liquor than discipline. The capital lets 12 sit there, neglected, to measure how much the games can fail and still technically function, and the results are brutal. Across 74 Hunger Games, 12 produces only 2 victors, an unnamed one decades ago, and Haymitch. For most of Katniss's life, Victor's village is either completely empty or effectively a one-man graveyard with a very loud alcohol problem. That part matters because the entire district has a daily visual reminder that winning did not save Haymitch. The mansion is there, the man inside is shattered. So what does that do to the narrative the capital is selling? The official story is simple. Anyone from any district can become a victor if the odds and the sponsors favor them. But you walk through District 12 and you see the seam, the merchants, the black market at the Hob, and then that lonely row of houses on the hill. The relationship between promise and reality is so obviously broken that even children understand it. Some districts are written off before the anthem even plays. Here's the pattern interrupt. District 12's weakness is exactly what makes it dangerous. Militarily, it's nothing. Symbolically, it's a smoking gun. It proves that equal opportunity in the games is a lie, that the capital will happily keep a district starving for coal and then bomb it into ash the second it becomes inconvenient. So why does this tiny failing district end up producing the one volunteer who isn't chasing the mansion at all? We're going to cover how Katniss grows out of this broken control group into something the capital never planned for. A victor who turns their own experiment against them. Katniss, the wrong kind of volunteer. Katniss's volunteer moment is the capital's worst-case scenario hiding in plain sight. On paper, volunteering is supposed to prove the system works. Ambitious kids step forward, the district cheers, and Victor's village shines on the hill as proof that the games can pay off. But here's the real question. What happens when the one volunteer from this tiny failing district isn't chasing any of that? Katniss doesn't move for glory, or training, or the promise of never working in the mines again. She moves because Prim screams, because she knows, with brutal mathematical certainty, that her 12-year-old sister will not survive. That part matters because it tells you exactly what kind of tribute District 12 quietly manufactures. Not a career, not a performer, but someone whose entire relationship to the games is survival through sacrifice. For the capital, that is a nightmare. A tribute who wants fame is predictable. You can bribe them with sponsors, flatter them with interviews, threaten their status. A tribute who wants to live at any cost will still play along. But someone whose core motive is protecting one specific person, that's harder to script. You can't easily redirect that into national spectacle without risking that the audience starts rooting for the love instead of the games. Remember, Katniss has already been running a private rebellion in the woods for years. She hunts illegally, trades in the black market the peacekeepers pretend not to see, and understands that the official rules of her district are more performance than reality. There is a lot to uncover here. Back then, those small crimes just keep her family fed. In the arena, The same skills let her read scarcity, track resources, and spot when the environment itself is being used as a weapon. This is where we talk about design failure. District 12 is engineered to be miserable: chronic hunger, collapsing minds, minimal investment. At face value, that should make people grateful for any scrap the capital throws them, especially a mansion in Victor's village. But the long-term effect is different. When you grow up knowing that the system will let your father die in an explosion and then pay you in silence, the promise of a fancy house doesn't feel stable enough to build your soul on. So Katniss enters the arena already half immune to capital rewards. She takes the food, the medicine, the dresses, but she never fully believes in the future they're selling. That's the unintended byproduct of District 12's design, a tribute who understands deprivation so well that abundance reads as a trap. And she's not actually the only exception. If you zoom out and watch how other districts respond to their own villages, you start to see just how strange 12 really is. Why do some districts produce eager volunteers while 12 almost never does? Why does one mansion on a hill become a dream in some places and a haunted house in others? We're going to cover that contrast next, because the way Victor's village functions in those other districts throws District 12's failure into even sharper focus. Beyond 1, 2, and 12, the invisible middle districts. So if District 12 turns its Victor's village into a haunted cul-de-sac, what's happening in the districts we barely see? The camera follows Katniss, but the system wasn't built just for coal miners and a drunk with a knife. At face value, Panem gives you 12 districts, and you think you know them. 1 and 2, polished career factories. 4, deadly swimmers. 11, starving fields. 12, walking cautionary tale. But here's the real question. What about the invisible middle districts 5, 6, 9, 10, where the story only gives us quick flashes of tributes on a chariot or a few seconds in training? Our narrative POV is brutally narrow. We live in 12, we visit 11, we tour 2 and 4 through the lens of the games. District 5's girl is the fox-faced one. District 6 is morphling addicts. 9 and 10 are basically cannon fodder. There is a lot to uncover here if you read those gaps as data instead of absence. Watch the tribute parade. The careers stand tall, owning the arena before it starts. Katniss and Peter are stunned just to be on fire and not immediately humiliated. But then you have those mid-tier teams, not confident, not completely hopeless either. Their costumes fit. Their waves are awkward but not terrified. You get the sense that in their home district, a victor isn't impossible, just rare. That part matters because it tells you how their victors' villages probably function. In District 1, 2, and 4, the village is practically an address you can train for. Whole families build their identity around getting a child into one of those houses. The relationship between the district and the games is aspirational on purpose. In 12, the village is the opposite. 2 occupied houses, then 1, then 3 again for a hot second. Most of the time it's an empty promise on a hill, a monument to failure more than hope. No volunteers, no pipeline, no real belief that anyone you know will ever live there. So what sits in the middle? In District 5, 6, 9, 10, the most logical reading is that the system works closer to how Snow intended on paper. A victor there is a miracle that happens just often enough to feel real. Every decade or so, a kid comes home, the village lights up, the district gets extra food, and children grow up thinking, someone from here did it. Maybe I could, but not so often that parents start grooming 10-year-olds with spears. We're going to cover how that spectrum is the real design. On one end, the career districts where volunteering is an almost professional track. In the center, these mid-tiers where the village sells hope without demanding full-time devotion to the arena. On the far end, 12, where the village is so underused it stops functioning as propaganda and becomes background scenery. And here's the twist, that failure isn't a bug, it's a tolerated flaw. The capital knows 12 almost never produces volunteers. They keep the village anyway. Why would a system built on control allow one district to opt out of the aspirational part of the games? This is where we talk about design, expendability, and why a broken District 12 is more useful to the capital than a healthy one. And the answer starts with coal, not victors. Career districts where the system actually works. Coal explains why 12 can be neglected, but to really see the design, you have to zoom out and look at the districts where the system actually works the way Snow intended. Career districts in 1, 2, and 4, the Hunger Games are not a random punishment that drops out of the sky once a year. They're a career track. Kids grow up in better fed, better armed districts, where you don't just survive childhood, you train through it. You have informal academies, older victors as coaches, peacekeepers who are very aware this is technically illegal and somehow never shut it down. Why? Because those kids are career tributes. They volunteer. They've been lifting weights, throwing spears, and studying past arenas since they were 10. At face value, that sounds horrifying. Parents pushing their children toward a blood sport. But here's the real question. What does the capital give them in return that District 12 never gets? A promise. In the career districts, Victor's Village is not an awkward cul-de-sac nobody moves into. It's the finish line. You can imagine the culture, posters of glimmer, clove, finnick hung in training halls. School lessons that pause every reaping day so everyone can cheer their district's team. Becoming a victor there has the same social energy as becoming a star athlete or a decorated war hero. The mansion, the endless food, the hot showers, they're not a joke. They're the visible endpoint of a socially approved path. That part matters because it turns the games from a terror into an aspiration. Parents brag that their kid got into the training center. Victors come back to open gyms, give speeches, mentor the next batch. The relationship between district and arena is proud, not resentful. When a tribute volunteers in 2, the crowd roars. When Katniss volunteers in 12, everyone is stunned into silence. We're going to cover how that difference feeds directly into the capital's control. If you normalize the games, you don't have to force children in at gunpoint. Their own neighbors push them. The local culture polices anyone who hesitates. A kid who doesn't want to volunteer in 2 isn't just disobeying the capital. They're disappointing their district's entire myth about itself. And for Snow, this is perfect. Stronger tributes mean better entertainment. Career packs give you ready-made narratives, arrogant champions, rivalries, betrayals. The capital audience gets drama. The districts get a rigged sense of hope. We could win this year. We've trained for this. Pattern interrupt. Now drop District 12 into that model. number training centers, no tolerated weapons practice, no victory parades that feel genuinely triumphant. Victor's village sits on a hill no one visits, attached to no pipeline of talent, no community pride. It's the same architecture as in 1 or 2, but stripped of the entire social ecosystem that makes it function. So in the career districts, the village is a promise kept. In 12, it's a punchline, and that contrast is the point. Next, we need to ask why the capital would rather keep 12 broken than upgrade it into yet another career factory. The social physics of Panem. Who gets to hope? So if 12's village is a punchline, how does it fit into the bigger social physics of Panem? This is where we talk about tiers. Because the capital isn't just throwing mansions around at random, it's calibrating who gets to hope. At the top, you've got the career districts 1, 2, and 4. In those places, Victor's village is practically part of the school curriculum. You grow up training, you walk past those houses every day, and you're told explicitly that one of them could be yours. At face value, it's meritocracy. Work hard, volunteer, win the games, get the prize. The relationship between effort and reward is visible, even if it's brutally rigged. Then you have the mid-tier, the functional districts, not starving, not pampered. Their tributes don't train from birth, but every so often, someone beats the odds. A BT from 5, a Cedar from 11. For them, the village is improbable but not impossible. There might be 1 occupied house, 2 if they're lucky, and the rest sit empty, waiting. That part matters because it keeps a lottery mentality alive. You probably won't win, but you could. And as long as you could, you don't burn the system down. On the bottom tier, districts like 11 and 12, the calculus shifts again. The games are a death sentence, and Victor's village is almost mythical. In 11, the scale of the population makes a victor feel distant, swallowed by fields and fences. In 12, there are barely 8,000 people and almost no victors at all. The promise is so thin it's translucent. Here's the real question. What happens to solidarity when hope is distributed on a gradient like that? Career districts are trained to see themselves as superior, almost honorary capital. Mid-tier districts cling to their slim chances, terrified that open rebellion would close the door on the next miracle win. And the bottom tier, they're so exhausted, so hungry, that organizing feels more dangerous than the status quo. District 12 is the extreme case study. Smallest population, extreme poverty, no real infrastructure. On top of that, you get cultural fragmentation, the seam versus the merchants, coal dust versus clean clothes, even different accents. When your district is internally split, you don't imagine a unified uprising, you imagine getting through another winter. Hope isn't just low, it's structurally absent. So why does the capital let one district fall this far behind when it's so good at calibrating hope everywhere else? Why not turn 12 into another 2 and get more career tributes out of it? There is a lot to uncover here, because once you notice that 12's village barely functions as propaganda, you have to ask a darker question. Maybe 12 isn't supposed to function. Maybe it's designed to be expendable. Next, we're going to cover what that expendability really means. Why a district that mines coal can still be treated as disposable, and how blowing it off the map actually strengthens the capital's message for a while. Why allow volunteers at all? So if District 12 is expendable, here's the real question. Why bother with volunteers at all? If the capital's goal is terror and control, why introduce any element of choice that might muddy the message? Why allow even a sliver of agency in a system that's supposed to feel inescapable? At face value, a cleaner version of the games seems obvious. No volunteers, no victor's village, no promise of a better life, just 2 random names every year, dragged to their deaths while everyone watches. You can imagine a Panem where every district is treated like 12 at its worst. No real rewards, no celebrations, just guaranteed misery and the quiet threat that your coal mine or your lumberyard or your children could disappear overnight. That sounds scarier, right? But this is where we talk about stability. Pure fear looks strong from the outside, but it's actually brittle. When people have nothing to lose, they become unpredictable. They stop calculating. They stop bargaining. Over 1 year, that might work. Over 75 years across 12 districts, it's a time bomb. Snow understands that. He doesn't want martyrs. He wants managers, parents who tell their kids to train harder, mayors who host feasts for a new victor, a district that hates the games but still participates in the fantasy that maybe this year it will be their turn to win. That part matters because the capital isn't just ruling bodies, it's ruling imaginations. So why even allow volunteers? Because volunteers are proof the system has seeped inside your head. A career tribute from District 1 or 2 isn't just a fighter, they're a billboard. They stand there and say, I chose this. I think this is my best shot at survival. The relationship between terror and reward becomes visible in a single raised hand. Now imagine the alternative. Again, no volunteers, no victors' mansions, no district-wide rewards when someone wins. Over time, you'd get entire generations who know with absolute certainty that the games offer them nothing. No hope, no angle, no way to game the system. You don't mentor tributes, you don't train, you don't engage. You just wait for your turn to die. How long before that apathy turns into open revolt? This is the brilliance behind Victor's Village and the volunteer rule working together. The capital isn't just calibrating fear, it's managing the ratio of hope to fear. A little terror to keep you in line. A little hope to keep you participating. And Snow practically spells this out in his conversation with Seneca Crane. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. We're going to cover that scene next, because District 12 is where that philosophy is pushed to its breaking point. What happens when a district that was never supposed to produce volunteers suddenly does, and that volunteer survives? Hope, but only in the right amount. Snow gives you the blueprint himself in that scene with Seneca Crane. He swirls the champagne, watches the games unfold, and drops the line that basically explains Panem, hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. At face value, it sounds almost inspirational. But here's the real question. What does a little hope actually look like when you turn it into architecture and policy? This is where we talk about Victor's Village, because Victor's Village is hope poured into concrete. Every district gets this tiny gleaming neighborhood that most people will never step inside. It's a physical promise. You could be the exception. Your child could be the one who never works the mines again. There is a lot to uncover here because the math makes that promise almost absurd. 12 districts, 24 tributes a year, 74 years before Katniss, and in District 12, 2 victors, then Haymitch alone for decades. So why build mansions for a district that almost never wins? That part matters because the capital doesn't actually need most people to believe they will win. It just needs them to believe someone could. Victor's Village is institutionalized hope. It turns the games from pure terror into a twisted lottery where the ticket is your child's life and the jackpot is one house on a hill. Compare that to old school repression. Back then, you put down rebellion with mass executions in the square. It's fast, but it's blunt. Everyone is afraid, but no one is invested. The games are the upgraded version. Instead of lining rebels up against a wall, the capital kills their children on television, then rewards one with food, fame, and that pristine house. Public death, public reward, fear and hope in the same broadcast. And District 12 sits right on the edge of that balance. The poverty is so extreme, the isolation so total, that people are numb. They don't train for the games, they don't volunteer, they barely watch. The relationship between 12 and the capital is mostly hunger and silence. But then there's Haymitch's house on the hill. One man who made it out. One reminder that the system technically works. When Katniss and Peter come home, the equation shifts. Suddenly, there are 3 occupied houses, 3 victors walking through the square. For the first time, children in 12 grow up seeing multiple examples that the promise is real. That's a lot of hope for a place that was designed to fail. And that's exactly why Snow starts to panic. So Victor's Village in 12 becomes this weird, rationed commodity. Hope you can see, but can't touch. Carefully controlled, statistically unreachable, yet always visible on that hill. And once one of those houses turns into the home of the Mockingjay, the capital's little hope starts breaking out of its cage. The next question is, what happens when that caged hope collides with open punishment? When the capital stops pretending the deal is fair at all? When the capital drops the mask and goes full punishment? You'd think that would be the end of the story. Pure fear, no pretense, no promise. But here's the real question. Why didn't Panem stay in that mode after the dark days? If terror worked so well, why bother inventing the games at all? Back then, during open war, control was blunt. Bombardment, executions, entire districts on fire. The dark days were the capital at maximum force and minimum subtlety. Now, after the Treaty of Treason, you don't have constant airstrikes over the seam. You have a yearly event, a ceremony, a spectacle that compresses all that punishment into a season of television. So why the change? Because terror burns hot, but it burns out. A regime that only knows how to crush ends up exhausting itself and its victims. You can't keep every district in active rebellion and active suppression forever. The cost is too high, and there's no space for the kind of cultural buy-in the capital wants from the richer districts. This is where we talk about efficiency. Snow doesn't just want obedience, he wants participation. That's what the games solve. They outsource repression to entertainment. Instead of endless raids, you tune in at 8 p.m. to watch your punishment in HD. Your district sends children. You dress them up, cheer them on, memorize their odds. You're forced into a relationship with your own suffering, Rooting for a victor you know is statistically doomed. At face value, it's a sports tournament. Underneath, it's forced complicity. That part matters because now the capital can tier its control. Capital citizens get fashion and betting odds. Career districts get real rewards and a believable hope of victory. Middle districts get just enough food and infrastructure to dream. Terror is still there, but wrapped in ritual, softened by the promise that maybe, one year, your tribute comes home. And then there's District 12, the exception that proves the rule. 12 is the closest thing to a pure terror district left in Panem. Minimal investment, minimal victors, minimal chance. Coal is needed, but the people are not. 8,000 or so residents, no real infrastructure, a peacekeeper force that swings between lazy corruption and thread-error brutality. It's a stress test for the system. How little hope can you give a district and still keep it functional? You can see the experiment fail in slow motion. Starvation pushes people to the woods and the hob. Controlled corruption keeps them alive but never powerful. The games barely pretend to offer 12 a path out. 3 living victors in 74 years is not a promise. It's a warning with a face. Here's the twist. When Katniss turns that tiny sliver of hope against the capital, the hybrid model hits its limit. The games stop working on 12, so 12 stops being worth the maintenance. Bombing the district after the quarter quell is the Dark Days playbook returning for one targeted purpose: make an example. Some districts, the capital decides, are more valuable as a smouldering cautionary tale than as a struggling economy. So where do you go after you've turned an entire district into a warning sign? You look at what survived the fire. The nicest house in a starving town. What survives the fire in District 12 isn't a hospital, or a school, or the mines. It's a cul-de-sac of mansions. You walk out past the seam, and you can feel that design on your feet. First, the shacks, sagging roofs, coal dust ground into every surface. Families packed into one room with a stove that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. This is where Katniss grows up, where the air smells like smoke and hunger and fear of the games. You keep going, and the houses shift. The merchant row near the square has glass windows, real storefronts, bakers and butchers who aren't technically starving. It's still poor, but you can see the hierarchy. Then, all at once, the ground tilts. At the edge of town, on its own little rise, Victor's village appears. 12 big, clean houses in a perfect circle, manicured lawns, paved paths, working electricity even when the rest of the district flickers. At face value, it looks like the capital kept its promise. Win the games, escape the seam, get a house with hot water and a full pantry. The visual is the point. Children from the seam can literally look up the hill and see what they're never supposed to touch. But here's the real question. Why build a luxury neighborhood for a district that almost never produces a victor? In the books, when Katniss moves in, there are only 3 occupied houses: Haymitch's decaying mess, Peter's neat, quiet home, and hers. 9 empty shells. Victor's village isn't a bustling suburb. It's a graveyard of almosts. Every empty porch is a reminder of all the tributes who went to the arena and never came back to fill it. There is a lot to uncover here in how people react to that space. Before the games, the Everdeens are seem poor. After Katniss and Peter win, they're physically relocated, pulled up the hill into this artificial comfort. The relationship between them and the rest of 12 snaps a little. Greasy Say still visits, but most people don't. Prim walks to school from a mansion now. The same family that once traded goat cheese for burned bread suddenly lives where the peacekeepers patrol a bit more carefully, and the cupboards are never empty. That part matters because the capital can point at those houses and say, "See? We reward loyalty and skill." They host the victory tour there. They film in the tidy kitchens. They turn trauma into a tourism brochure. We're going to cover how that surveillance works in other sections, but here, the architecture itself is propaganda. The village tells every starving kid, don't dream of ending the games. Dream of surviving them. And in District 12, that hope is so thin, it almost snaps. Volunteering never takes hold because everyone knows those empty houses better than they know any victor. You think back to the early games, when victors just went home to the same poverty. So why the change? Because a mansion on a hill is cheaper than real reform, and when we see what happens to this nice neighborhood once the rebellion escalates, the capital's real priorities become impossible to ignore. Feasts, food parcels, and the economics of spectacle, and the capital knows a hill of empty mansions isn't enough. You can't just show people wealth. You have to feed them with it. Literally. This is where we talk about the feasts, the food parcels, the sudden flood of plenty that hits a starving district the moment a tribute comes home in one piece. At face value, those victory celebrations look generous. District 12 gets tables sagging under roasts, bread, actual sugar, more food in one night than most families see in months. The peacekeepers loosen up, curfews blur, there's music in the square instead of whippings. For a few hours, that engineered poverty you've been living in flickers off. You're not a coal miner's kid, you're part of a winning district. But here's the real question. Why does the capital pay out at all? Why turn the games into a twisted revenue stream where a dead child means nothing and a surviving one means bonuses, grain and oil for everyone? The reason is simple. If victory feels profitable, then every reaping becomes an investment opportunity. We're going to cover the emotional math the capital forces on parents. Your child is taken. If they die, you get grief and the same empty cupboards. If they win, you get food parcels, extra rations, maybe a few months where no one in your village starves to death. Suddenly, your private horror is tied to public gain. Your neighbors are watching. Your district's stomach is on the line. That part matters because it turns loss into failure. If your tribute goes down in the bloodbath, it's not just a tragedy, it's a missed payout. The capital has quietly shifted the question from why are our children in the arena to why couldn't our tribute pull it off? Blame moves sideways, away from the capital and onto the victims, their families, even their training. In a place like District 1, those feasts are routine. Victors cycle through, the parties blur together, and the food is excess stacked on top of comfort. In District 12, it's the opposite. One victor in decades. Then Katniss and Peter. The celebrations are so rare that they hit harder, burn brighter, and leave a sharper hangover when the coal dust settles again and the bakery lines reappear. That's why Haymitch stands out so violently against the capital's scripted joy. He's the walking reminder that the last time this district got its reward, the victor came back broken, drunk and furious at the very system that's pouring champagne over his head. The capital wants him to be a mascot of hope. He insists on being a cautionary tale. There is a lot to uncover here in terms of conditioning. Those food parcels aren't charity, they're training treats. Districts are taught that cooperation with the games, mentoring, playing for sponsors, selling the romance equals material relief. Even when the odds are awful, you keep buying the ticket, because what if this year is the year you all eat? So what happens when the capital suddenly decides that even victors and their promised feasts are no longer safe? Living in the village, a cage with better furniture. So what happens when the capital suddenly decides that even victors and their promised feasts are no longer safe? You move them into a prettier cage. On paper, Victor's village in District 12 is the dream. You go from a one-room shack in the seam to a heated mansion on the hill. The pantry is full, the lights always turn on, and no one is checking your tesserae tally anymore. At face value, it looks like the one part of the games is promise that actually comes true. Win, and you never starve again. But here's the real question. What does your day actually look like once the cameras go home? You're not going back to the mines. You're not queuing for rations. Instead, you wake up in an oversized house that's too quiet, surrounded by identical empty homes, with a peacekeeper checkpoint at the bottom of the road and capital phones wired right into your kitchen. You're safe from the district, but you're never safe from the capital. There is a lot to uncover here about that relationship. The village is physically separated from town, which means your old neighbors can see your windows, but can't casually knock on your door. You're elevated above them, literally. And that part matters because it turns you into a symbol before you've even had breakfast. Every trip into the square is a performance. Every absence is suspicious. Even the privacy is curated isolation. And then there's mentoring. Winning doesn't end the games, it just upgrades your role. Every year, victors from 12 are required to train and escort 2 more terrified kids to the capital. You walk them through strategy, you stand beside them in the parade, and you watch them die. Or worse, watch them win and inherit your curse. Your continued comfort depends on continued cooperation. If you refuse, you're not just endangering yourself. The capital can cut the food shipments your victory unlocked for the whole district. This is where we talk about Haymitch, because he's the clearest case study of what that does to a person. He wins the second quarter quell as a teenager, uses the force field against the arena, and immediately becomes a problem the capital can't kill outright. So they do something slower. They trap him in a spotless house and make him relive his trauma every single year. His response? Alcoholism, hostility, the booby-trapped front door. Isn't random. It's self-defense in a place that's supposed to be home. Pattern interrupt. If Victor's village is so luxurious, why do its residents keep trying to escape without leaving? Katniss and Peter show you the answer. When they move in after the 74th games, the space never feels earned or real. Katniss keeps her hunting habits, slipping under the fence and hiding in an empty house when the new peacekeeper, Thread, electrifies the perimeter. Peter bakes, paints, and works on their shared plant book, but his prosthetic leg and the staged capital phone calls remind you this isn't healing, it's content production. Even their romance is managed through the village. Snow visits Katniss there, not in town, because the hill is a controlled set. The roses, the threats, the cameras that can be turned on at any moment, those all live in Victor's village. The message is clear. You don't retire from the games. you just get a nicer arena. And when District 12 is bombed, what survives? Not the hob, not the scene. Victor's village. The capital preserves the symbol and erases the people, proving the village was never about giving victors a home. It was about giving the capital a stage they can keep using, right up until rebellion makes the set catch fire. District 12's peacekeepers. Corruption by design. Victor's village survives as a stage. District 12 itself, that's built to be a fire hazard. So if the buildings are disposable, what about the people who are supposed to keep order there? At face value, peacekeepers are the capital's iron fist. White armor, guns, the promise of punishment if you step out of line. But here's the real question. Why are the peacekeepers in 12 so bad at their jobs for most of Katniss's life? Early on, the enforcement in 12 is almost comically soft focus. They're underpaid, bored, and more interested in their drink than in chasing kids through the woods. You have peacekeepers buying from the hob, eating greasy Say's soup, pretending not to see Gale and Katniss slip under the fence. Minor infractions, hunting, snares, black market bread, are technically crimes against the capital. The relationship on the ground is closer to "don't make me write this up" than "obey or die." That part matters because this isn't a failure of the system, it is the system. There is a lot to uncover here. By allowing controlled corruption, the capital gets a free welfare program it doesn't have to fund. The hob becomes a shadow economy that keeps people just alive enough to mine coal and show up for the reaping. You want meat, medicine, a bit of lamp oil? You trade in a market the capital could shut down any day, but doesn't. That's not mercy, that's efficiency. Think about the math. If the capital actually enforced every hunting law, every food rule, District 12 would starve too fast. Dead workers don't pull coal, so instead they outsource survival to illegal activity, then skim loyalty through fear. You never forget that your life depends on a peacekeeper deciding to look the other way. You're not a citizen, you're a favor someone can revoke. And when your whole existence runs on favors and side deals, you don't plan rebellions, you plan dinner. People are too busy navigating who they owe, who might inform, how to keep their kids off the capital's radar. We're going to cover open defiance later, but this is where we talk about why it almost never happens here. District 12 is kept apolitical not through constant violence, but through constant scrambling. Then Katniss wins the games, and everything breaks. Suddenly, this background district has a victor who becomes a symbol, and Snow sees a different kind of fire hazard. So what changes? The peacekeepers don't just get stricter, they get replaced. Thread arrives. Thread is the policy shift made flesh. Public whippings, floggings for black market bread. The hob burned to the ground. The same fence that was broken for years is now mysteriously electrified exactly when Katniss starts slipping out. The neglect flips into a crackdown almost overnight, and that tells you the earlier laxity was never about incompetence. It was a setting on a dial. This oscillation, years of rot, then sudden brutality, is the design to fail model in action. District 12 is allowed to decay, to self-medicate through corruption, until that decay produces something politically inconvenient. A girl with a Mockingjay pin, a love story the capital can't quite control. Then the hammer comes down, not to fix 12, but to discipline it. And once you see that pattern with the peacekeepers, you have to ask, where else did the capital build failure into the foundations of this district? The hob, hunting, and legalized illegality. Once you notice that pattern of weaponized neglect, you have to look at the places that are helping District 12 survive and ask, are they really helping? Or are they part of the design? This is where we talk about the hob and the woods, the places that feel free. At face value, the hob is the one spot in 12 that actually works. It's crowded, noisy, full of movement. You can trade a squirrel for bread, a dress for paraffin, a stolen peacekeeper boot for enough coal to get you through winter. It's the black market that keeps the district from starving when rations run out and the mines don't pay enough. On paper, the capital should hate this. So why does it exist for years with only token crackdowns? Because the hob solves the problem the capital created. Starvation is a powerful tool, but if you push a population of 8,000 past a certain point, you don't get obedience. You get riots. The hob is the pressure valve. You go there to keep your sister fed, not to plan an uprising. There is a lot to uncover here, but the basic relationship is simple. The capital withholds enough that you have to break the rules to live, then graciously overlooks some of that rule breaking until it doesn't. Hunting beyond the fence works the same way. Officially, it's illegal. The fence is supposed to be electrified. The woods are forbidden. The penalty is death. But Katniss grows up slipping under dead wire, bringing home game, even feeding peacekeepers through the back door. Everyone knows. No one stops her. Why? Because her bow is aimed at deer, not at the capital. As long as illegal hunting turns into full bellies instead of organized resistance, it's useful. It keeps the seam just above collapse and quietly grateful that the fence malfunctions. Here's the real question. What happens when that illegal survival starts to look political? That's where Gale's whipping comes in. For years, he's part of this tolerated ecosystem, trading at the hob, hunting with Katniss, working the system the way everyone else does. Then, after the victors from 12 become symbols, Gale interferes with the peacekeeper, and suddenly those old laws snap back into place. Thread doesn't invent new rules, he enforces the ones the capital has been sitting on. That part matters because it shows the strategy. The ambiguity is the weapon. You never know which broken rule is fine and which one will get you flogged in the square. That uncertainty keeps you small. You don't organize, you hustle. You're too busy calculating today's risk to imagine tomorrow's rebellion. So when you zoom out, the hob and the hunting grounds aren't glitches. They're dials, tools the capital uses to tune District 12 so it hovers just above collapse. Enough hunger to break you, enough off-the-books survival to keep you chasing personal hope instead of collective power. But what happens when those dials stop working on one particular girl with a bow? Starvation as policy, not accident. Because here's the twist. When those dials stop working on Katniss, we finally see what they were really set to. Starvation in District 12 isn't a background condition, it's policy. You grow up in the seam, and hunger isn't an emergency, it's the default. That part matters because chronic hunger changes what choice even means. You're not deciding between good options. You're deciding between slow death and slightly slower death. So you line up for tesserae, even though every extra grain ration is another slip of paper with your name in the games. You take it anyway, because what's the point of lower odds in a future reaping if you don't survive the winter to reach it? This is where we talk about work, or what passes for work in 12. The mines are deadly, the pay is a joke, and the safety standards are a rumor. At face value, you'd expect people to refuse. But here's the real question. Why don't they? The reason is simple and brutal. The alternative isn't unemployment, it's immediate hunger. So people accept cave-ins, black lung, and 12-hour shifts because the capital has engineered a relationship where refusing dangerous labor equals starving your kids. Food is the capital's favorite leverage because it looks so harmless. We're going to cover peacekeepers in more detail later, but notice how often their power is measured in food. Greasy Say's pot gets raided, the black market stalls get taxed, and suddenly the same peacekeeper who beat your neighbor is trading meat for information. Corrupt? Sure. Accidental? No. The capital lets that corruption stand because it turns food into a currency of obedience. Even the idea of a victor is wrapped in full pantries. When Katniss first sees Haymitch's house, what shocks her isn't just the appliances, it's the abundance. Real coffee, meat, sugar. The promise is clear. Survive the games and you never worry about food again. That's not generosity, that's marketing. Now zoom in on the psychology. Constant deprivation shrinks your time horizon. You can't strategize about a rebellion next year when you're counting potatoes for tonight. Planning a strike, organizing across the district, even asking why the system exists at all. Those are luxuries for people who aren't faint from hunger. The capital doesn't need to outlaw long-term thinking if it can starve it out of you. And it's not just physical, it's humiliation baked into daily life. Public floggings in the square remind you that your body is not really yours. The reaping turns the entire district into an audience for its own powerlessness. You stand there, dressed in your best rags, while capital cameras pan over your hollow faces and Effie Trinket chirps about honor and hope. Then, that night, the broadcasts cut to the capital's glowing skyline and overflowing buffets. The contrast is the point. It's a visual equation. Their excess equals your emptiness. So none of this is a glitch in the system. It's the cheapest possible control strategy. Fully support District 12 and you risk giving it strength. Fully destroy it and you lose a useful example. Keep it starving but functional, and you get coal, you get fear, and you get a living warning to every other district about what happens if you step out of line. Until Katniss does, and suddenly, the cost-benefit math of keeping 12 on the edge stops working, for Snow and for the games themselves. Until Katniss does, and suddenly, the cost-benefit math of keeping 12 on the edge stops working, for Snow and for the games themselves. So what does the capital do? It doesn't tighten the fence. It doesn't flood the mines with new peacekeepers. It erases the district. One night, while the Quarter Quell Arena is still spinning on television, District 12 is bombed in a single calculated strike. No warning, no evacuation, no attempt to preserve the labor force that supposedly keeps Panem's lights on. You see the aftermath through Katniss's return. The blackened scene, bodies turned to ash, the town square leveled, and only about 800 survivors fleeing through the meadow. The mines? Destroyed. The hob? Gone. Even the livestock is wiped out. At face value, that decision makes no sense. If coal is indispensable, why casually throw away the only district that produces it? Here's the real question. If Snow can't afford to lose his power plants, why is he willing to lose the people who feed them? Why bomb 12 instead of just replacing the mayor, installing Thread earlier, or turning the whole place into a military work camp? That part matters because it exposes what 12 really is in the capital's system. By the time of the Quarter Quell, 12's symbolic value has overtaken its economic value. This is where we talk about the relationship between resources and rebellion. Katniss isn't just a victor. She's the Mockingjay, the living glitch in the games. District 12 becomes her origin story, her proof that the capital's promise of safety is a lie. So Snow flips the script. He turns her home into a warning. Support this girl and your entire district can vanish. Overnight. We're going to cover the coal question more directly. The capital is technologically advanced, running hovercrafts, force fields, mutts, and a 24/7 broadcast system. Are we really supposed to believe they've bet everything on one tiny starving coal district with 8,000 people and a single functioning mine? Or is it more reasonable that by year 75, they've diversified hydro, nuclear, other districts' resources, or stockpiled enough coal to cushion the loss? If that's true, then 12's continued existence was never about energy security. It was about narrative security. The poorest district, the least victors, the constant reminder that you can survive on the edge of death and still owe the capital everything. Once that story stops working, once the girl from the seam turns into a spark, 12 becomes expendable. And this is the moment that retroactively confirms our thesis. District 12 was designed to be the district you could afford to lose, a disposable cautionary tale. When it becomes politically useful to trade coal for terror, Snow doesn't hesitate, which raises the next problem. If you're willing to wipe out an entire district, how do you keep the rest of Panem from realizing the games were never about resources at all? Book versus movie, two visions of a doomed district. So when you watch District 12 burn and Victor's village still standing, you get it instinctively. This place was built for a different purpose. But here's the real question. How much of that designed to fail feeling is in the text, and how much is in the camera? On the page, District 12 is tiny. 8,000 people, one square, one fence, one train station, and then miles of nothing. Collins keeps repeating the isolation. It's a district you can walk across, a place so forgotten that most peacekeepers are lazy because no one expects an uprising here. At face value, that small population is the point. This isn't a bustling coal hub. It's a controlled lab environment the capital can afford to lose. The movies shift that. Visually, 12 feels more industrial, more textured. You see rusted machinery, long rows of miners, bigger crowds in the square. It looks poor, yes, but also more functional, more generic dystopian poverty than an endangered village. There is a lot to uncover here, because that change quietly alters the reason you think 12 survives as long as it does. On screen, it can pass as an underfunded resource mine. In the books, it's barely a town, which makes its continued existence feel strategic, not accidental. This is where we talk about Victor's village. In the novels, it's absurdly empty. 12 houses, 3 occupied, full power, hot water, stocked kitchens, and silence. Katniss notices how her voice echoes, how she can go days without seeing anyone. The relationship between that emptiness and the rest of the district is brutal. You walk 10 minutes and go from starvation to unused refrigerators. The films lean on visuals to sell that gap. Wide shots frame the village on a hill, separated by trees and distance. The camera often sits behind Katniss, looking down toward the seam, so you feel her physically elevated above her own people. But the production design also softens things. The houses are closer together, cozier, more lived in. The soundscape adds birds, wind, domestic noise. You don't always feel that clinical, failed experiment energy the books hammer home. Pay attention to how they shoot the interiors. In the first film, Katniss's new house is warmly lit, almost golden. The promise is comfort. Later, when peacekeepers tighten control, we get colder light, harsher shadows, but we still lose key book details. Peter's prosthetic leg, their shared planned book, Katniss hiding in an empty house when the fence goes live. Those omissions make the village feel more like an actual reward and less like a stage set built to monitor a victor. So why does that part matter? Because we're talking about design. Because a grittier, more populated 12 and a warmer village nudge you toward reading this as poverty and corruption rather than engineered failure. The films sharpen the spectacle and the trauma, but they blur the sense that Snow has tuned this district, its size, its isolation, its ghost suburb of champions, with scientific precision, which leaves one more adaptation choice we need to pull apart. When the bombs fall and only Victor's village survives, what story is the capital trying to tell with those intact houses? Inside of Victor's head, the hidden cost of winning, in 1298 DL1, those intact houses aren't just eerie set dressing, they're a psychological thesis statement. Because when you look at who's supposed to live in them, you realize something bleak. In District 12, the people who win the games are the ones who prove the system is unwinnable. This is where we talk about Haymitch. On paper, he's the capital's success story. A teenager from the smallest, poorest district who outsmarts the arena and earns a permanent address on that hill. At face value, he should be the walking promise of Victor's village. But what do kids in 12 actually see? A man so drunk he can't stand at the reaping, a mentor who mocks the games, the capital, and himself in the same breath. His public collapse is doing free propaganda work, just not the kind Snow intended. Here's the real question. If victory is supposed to sell hope, why is 12's only adult Victor a warning label? The reason is trauma as policy. Haymitch watched his family and girlfriend murdered as punishment for outsmarting the arena. The capital didn't just hurt him, they turned his survival into a curse he has to perform in front of the entire district. Every bottle, every insult, quietly tells the Seam kids, even if you win, this is what you become. Then Katniss and Peter come home and break the fantasy even further. You think Victor's village is going to be their escape, right? Hot showers, full pantries, no more reaping. Instead, they bring the arena back with them. Nightmares, flashbacks, Peter's prosthetic leg, Katniss sleeping with the windows nailed shut. And it's not just internal. The capital's surveillance follows them into 12. Cameras, phone lines straight to Snow, peacekeepers watching who visits those houses. The relationship between luxury and freedom snaps. You can see the wires. We're going to cover the propaganda angle more later, but notice how fast they're weaponized against their own people. Victory tours force them to smile through speeches written in the capital, to stand in front of grieving districts and sell the games as honorable. Back home, Katniss has to stage the star-crossed lover act just to keep Gale and her family alive. Later, she becomes the Mockingjay, then flips into coin symbol. Different regime, same move. Turn the traumatized Victor into a billboard. That part matters because Victor's village was supposed to create aspirational figures. Career districts get sleek, confident champions on posters. 12 gets a drunk, a girl who can't stop shaking, and a boy who's been hijacked into trying to kill her. These aren't role models. They're cautionary tales walking past the fence line. And by the time 12 is bombed, that's the final punchline. The district's most visible survivors are its most broken. The scene is ash. The hob is gone, but those 12 houses stay standing with 2 shattered victors inside. The message is brutal. The experiment of District 12 has run its course. The coal, the people, even the town are disposable. The only thing worth preserving is the symbol of what winning did to them. So when you see those empty streets in Victor's village, the real question isn't, how did this survive? It's what story is the capital planning to tell with it next? A thought experiment. So if Victor's village can survive without the district that built it, here's the real question. What happens when the capital decides to copy the entire District 12 experiment somewhere else? Because once you see 12 as a prototype, you start to notice a pattern. You can almost imagine a capital planning document for a designed-to-fail district. Small population, so any uprising is easy to contain. An essential industry, but one that's replaceable or stockpiled, so the capital can afford to lose it for a while. Geographic isolation, so no one sees what's really happening. And then, crucially, built-in social divisions so the people never move as one. That part matters because it turns failure into a feature. The district doesn't have to thrive, it just has to produce enough to justify its existence and suffer enough to send a message. You see this in 12 with the seam versus the merchants, with the hob as a tolerated black market, with peacekeepers who are corrupt but not quite monstrous until Thread shows up. The relationship between cruelty and neglect is calibrated, not random. So what happens if we apply that framework to districts we barely see, like 9 and 10? We know 9 handles grain, 10 handles livestock, both provide food, which is vital, but neither has the singular prestige of one's luxury goods or 2's peacekeeper training. At face value, they're just agricultural hubs. But if you're Snow, why wouldn't you treat them as rural test sites the way 12 is a coal test site? Picture District 9. Endless fields, scattered processing plants, a population spread thin across farmland, easy to isolate, easy to starve into obedience by diverting shipments. You allow a little smuggling of grain, a little bribery in the warehouses, the same controlled corruption we're going to cover in 12. People are too busy surviving and too far apart to organize. Any accident with the harvest becomes a warning. Then District 10, herders, slaughterhouses, animal disease as a built-in threat. You can imagine the capital threatening to cull entire herds if there's unrest. The wealthier foreman versus the ranch hands, the people who work indoors versus those outside in brutal conditions. Instant class divide. There is a lot to uncover here when you start asking who gets meat, who gets scraps, and who gets blamed when quotas aren't met. Now zoom back in on the victors' villages in those places. How often do you think they're actually full? District 9, with barely any named victors in canon, probably has a row of pristine, barely lived-in houses, perfect lawns, perfect paint, and almost no one home. The emptiness itself becomes propaganda. See, you could live here. Someone just has to win. Imported marble fountains in a place where workers can't afford clean water. A victor's mansion overlooking stockyards. Maybe only one or two houses ever occupied, the others staged for capital cameras during the victory tour. This is where we talk about the promise of escape being more valuable than the escape itself. By replicating 12's model across multiple low-status districts, the capital builds redundancy into its terror. If one district rebels, you burn it, preserve the village, and point to the next one as the new example. Grain can come from somewhere else. Meat can come from somewhere else. Coal can come from somewhere else. But the story of what happens to ungrateful districts, that can be retold endlessly. And that's the real reason District 12 feels so disturbingly plausible. It isn't a one-off narrative convenience. It's the logical outcome of a governing philosophy that treats people as interchangeable, industries as movable, and suffering as a renewable resource. Once you see that, you have to ask, if the capital is willing to design districts to fail, what happens when a victor refuses to play their assigned role in that design? Was District 12 always meant to be erased? So once you see 12 as a district engineered to be fragile, you hit the uncomfortable next step. Was it always meant to be wiped off the map? Or did Katniss stumble into a personal feud with Snow that just happened to end in mass murder? On the surface, the bombing reads as revenge. Katniss defies the games twice, embarrasses the capital on live TV, becomes the Mockingjay, and suddenly her home is a smoking crater. At face value, that looks extremely emotional and extremely specific. You hurt me, I erase you. But here's the real question. Could Snow have done that to any district? Or was 12 uniquely pre-positioned to disappear? This is where we talk about premeditation. Look at the long game. District 12 is tiny, around 8,000 people, and it stays that way for decades despite being responsible for coal, a resource the capital supposedly needs. There is a lot to uncover here. You don't starve your miners, deny them medical care, and ignore basic infrastructure if you're planning to rely on them forever. You do that when the labor is cheap, replaceable, or already backed up somewhere else. By the time of the Second Rebellion, the capital has other energy options and other coal districts mentioned in passing. That part matters because it turns 12 from essential industry into redundant prototype. It's a buffer on the border, socially fractured between the seam and the merchants, and kept weak through controlled corruption. Lazy peacekeepers, a tolerated black market, just enough food to keep people desperate but not unified. All of that is a design that says, this district can be sacrificed if the political calculus demands it. So why not just say there was a secret Erase 12 memo in some vault under Snow's mansion and call it a day? Because the counter-argument is important. Snow is a petty man in a very grand office. He absolutely uses Katniss's attachment to 12 against her. He leaves Victor's village standing, the one place tied to her status as a victor, as a twisted monument. He wants her to walk through those intact houses, knowing the seam is ash. That's targeted psychological warfare, not just urban planning. We're going to cover how those two readings actually fit together. The system was built with districts like 12 on a disposable setting. Katniss doesn't create that option. She activates it. Her defiance gives Snow the perfect public reason. Punish the symbol by annihilating her origin story, while quietly removing a district that has already outlived its strategic usefulness. So whether or not anyone ever drafted a formal plan titled Decommission District 12, the outcome is the same. Once 12 stopped serving its narrow purpose as a coal mine, a controlled experiment in poverty, its destruction wasn't an aberration. It was the logical next move. The real horror is that in this system, any district built on those terms is living on borrowed time. Which raises a bigger question. If 12 was the first to go, which district was supposed to be next? The illusion of choice. Why District 12 had to fail. If District 12 was first on the chopping block, here's the real question. Why build a district that's already halfway to collapse, then act surprised when it falls? This is where we talk about design. At face value, 12 is just the poor coal district, tiny population, extreme poverty, a labor force that starves even while providing the capital's power. But when you zoom in, every part of that setup is a rigged choice. Tesserae, the reaping, volunteering, even Victor's village on the hill, they all pretend to offer options. The math says otherwise. Start with the poverty. When your district has about 8,000 people and most of them are hungry, tesserae isn't a safety net. It's a trap. You can choose not to take extra grain and oil, but then your family starves. Or you can choose to sign your name over and over, multiplying your odds in the games. Either way, the capital gets what it wants: desperation or dead children. That part matters because it turns survival into consent on paper. Two names are drawn at random, so technically everyone had a chance, right? But 12's tiny population means you know those faces. You probably know exactly how many times your little brother signed up for tesserae. When Prim's name is called, volunteering suddenly looks heroic. In reality, it's the system outsourcing its own cruelty. The capital doesn't have to drag Katniss away. She walks to the stage herself. Then there's the tolerated corruption, the hob, the black market, the lazy peacekeepers before thread. On the surface, it feels like the capital is looking the other way. In practice, it's controlled leakage. You can poach if you're careful, you can bribe, you can trade, but only enough to keep 12 barely functional and deeply divided. Hope exists, but it's rationed. And sitting above all of this is an almost empty Victor's village. 12 houses, 3 living Victors. That's not a reward system, that's negative space. Every time you walk past those vacant mansions, the promise is right there: win the games, escape the seam, never fear the reaping again. But in a district that almost never produces a victor, the odds of anyone you know actually getting there are microscopic. It's aspiration as background scenery. Here's the real question: why keep one district so obviously doomed? Because someone has to be the bottom. If you're in a mid-tier district, say 4 or 7, you can point to 12 and think, at least we're not them. The system feels fair by comparison. There is a lot to uncover here about that relationship. 12's failure is the proof the capital uses that the games are merit-based everywhere else. Katniss's journey blows that illusion up. She doesn't win because the choices worked. She survives because she keeps breaking the rules those choices are built on, hunting outside the fence, faking a romance, refusing to kill Peter. Her rebellion exposes the core truth. None of the Capital's options were ever meant to lead to real freedom. They were meant to organize obedience. And that sets up the final question we're going to cover. Why does Suzanne Collins start the entire story in the district designed to fail? What does it mean that revolution is born in the place the Capital treated as expendable scenery? From failed district to spark of revolution. So if District 12 is built to be expendable scenery, why does the entire story refuse to leave it alone? This is where we talk about the Capital's biggest miscalculation. The weakest district in the system becomes the one export they can't control. At face value, 12 is the perfect failure. Small population, almost no victors, no real military value beyond coal. If it starves, the Capital shrugs and reroutes trains. That's the design. But here's the real question. What kind of people grow up inside a district that knows on some level it was never meant to matter? Not obedient citizens. Survivors, smugglers, kids who learn very early that the official rules and the real rules are two different games. You see that in Katniss before she ever touches an arena. She hunts illegally, trades in a black market the peacekeepers pretend not to see, and understands that the tesserae system is a rigged relationship between hunger and hope. The Capital thinks deprivation will keep 12 desperate and grateful for scraps. Instead, it trains a girl who can track, shoot, negotiate, lie on command, and still not believe a single promise the Capital makes on television. There is a lot to uncover here. Districts with strong victor culture, 1, 2, 4, are saturated in Capital narratives. The games are career paths, the arena is a stage, and victory is a brand. In 12, there's almost nothing. One drunk mentor, a forgotten village on a hill, and a history of tributes who die in the bloodbath. That part matters because Katniss doesn't grow up worshipping victors. She grows up assuming she will never be one. So when she does become the symbol, she treats the role as a weapon, not a prize. Then the Capital presses the self-destruct button. They bomb 12. Strategically, it makes sense. Erase the Mockingjays' home, erase her leverage. But emotionally, it's the moment the mask rips off. The district that was always treated as disposable is literally disposed of. And instead of breaking Katniss, it confirms every suspicion she's ever had about the people running the games. Her grief over Rue, over Prim's near miss, over the seam's constant hunger suddenly fuses with the crater where her home used to be. Personal pain turns into political resolve. And narratively, starting in 12 is brutal on purpose. When you first meet Katniss, the odds of her destabilizing an empire are statistically absurd. That's why every act of resistance buries the Arena Alliance. Choosing Peter again lands harder. You're watching someone from the losing district, the designed to fail district, repeatedly break systems that were never built with her survival in mind. So here's the question we're going to cover next. If Panem's weakest point hides its strongest spark, what other designed to fail systems, in fiction and in our own world, might be doing the exact same thing without anyone noticing yet? Join the village where we keep pulling at Panem's threads. So if District 12 is our case study in a system built to fail, what does that actually leave us with when the smoke clears? At face value, it looks simple. A poor coal district, unlucky in the games, occasionally producing a victor who gets a house on the hill. But here's the real question. What happens when you zoom out and treat 12 not as a backdrop, but as a designed machine? You see that it was never just unlucky. It was structurally engineered to be poor, isolated, and expendable, with Victor's village standing there as a hollow promise that escape was possible if you just played the games correctly. Over this episode, we've walked that whole arc. We went back into the historical backstory, the first rebellion, and Snow's long-term strategy to turn 12 into a buffer state you can sacrifice if things go wrong. We're going to cover the relationship between all those pieces one more time. You watched how the village was built as a showcase, how mentoring and media tours kept victors chained to the capital, how enforcement and starvation worked together so no one in the seam ever forgot where power really lived. We traced the mechanics, corrupt peacekeepers who look lazy until threat arrives, the hob functioning as a controlled black market, tesserae deepening class divisions between merchants and miners. That part matters because it proves the neglect isn't random, it's calibrated. Just enough food to keep the coal moving, just enough hope to keep you buying the promise, just enough Victor's village to make you think the system might someday work in your favor. And then, when Katniss breaks the script, we see the final design feature: disposability. The bombing of District 12 after the Quarter Quell isn't a glitch. It's the blueprint completing itself. The capital doesn't rush to preserve its labor force. It lets almost the entire population burn, while the 12 perfect houses of Victor's village remain, untouched, waiting as a psychological monument to what was lost and who defied them. This is where we talk about what this channel is actually doing. There is a lot to uncover here, not just in District 12, but in every system Suzanne Collins builds. We're interested in why these structures exist, how symbols like Victor's village carry propaganda, and what happens when a single victor or a single choice snaps the tension they're built on. So if you want more deep dives into the systems, symbols, and world building of the Hunger Games, this is the place. Tell me in the comments, which other districts or institutions in Panem do you think were designed to fail? District 11's plantations? The capital's own economy? The rebel strategy and its hidden costs? What do you want us to pull apart next? And why? May the odds of seeing through the system be ever in your favor. And if Victor's village taught us anything, it's that once you see the design, you can never unsee the games.